Get wisdom. Get insight. Proverbs chapter 4, verse 5. Mark chapter 9, verse 32. But they did not understand the saying, and they were afraid to question him. A man was walking through an elephant camp, and he saw that the elephants weren't being kept in cages or held by the use of chains. All that was preventing them from escaping from the camp was a small piece of rope tied to one of their legs. As the man gazed upon the elephants, he was completely confused as to why the elephants didn't just use their strength to break the rope and escape the camp. They could easily have done so, but instead they didn't even try. Curious and wanting to know the answer, he asked a trainer why the elephants were just standing there and never tried to escape. The trainer replied, "When they were very young and much smaller, we used the same size rope to tie them, and at that age, it's enough to hold them. As they grow up, they are conditioned to believe that they cannot break away. They believe that the rope can still hold them, so they never try to free themselves." The only reason the elephants weren't breaking free and escaping from the camp was that over time they adopted the belief that it just wasn't possible. The moral of the story, no matter how much the world tries to hold you back, always continue with the belief that what you want to achieve is possible. Today, Jesus tells his disciples that the Son of Man will be handed over to men, and they will kill him, and 3 days after his death he will rise. But the disciples didn't understand what he was talking about. As long as the disciples had been alive, they had been taught the finality of death, that once a person died, they didn't come back to life, just like the trainers of the elephant had taught the elephants that a rope around their leg would prevent them from walking away. What Jesus was telling them didn't make sense in terms of human or secular world thinking. So why didn't they ask for clarification? Mark tells us they were afraid to question Jesus. Actually, they were held back by their own preconceived notions of the finality of death. They may have considered what Jesus had just said to Peter about the same subject in the previous chapter, chapter 8, verses 31 to 33. Then he began to teach them that the Son of Man was destined to suffer grievously and to be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and the scribes, and be put to death, and after 3 days to rise again. And he said all this quite openly. Then, taking him aside, Peter tried to rebuke him. But turning and seeing his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said to him, "Get behind me, Satan. You are thinking not as God thinks, but as human beings do." The disciples lacked both the understanding and the wisdom to seek a definitive answer to, "He will rise in 3 days." In short, they were like the elephants. They had been conditioned by the secular world's view of death and feared to ask for clarification because of what Jesus had already said to Peter. Remember when you were a child and your older sibling got into trouble with your parents for doing something. As a result, you were certainly not going to repeat the error. The disciples were no different. They also lacked the understanding and wisdom to ask for clarification. Understanding and wisdom are two very different things. Understanding seeks knowledge. Wisdom applies the knowledge to a problem. The disciples were thinking not as God thinks, but as human beings do.